she was out, he decided to sneak in and see what he could see. And he got in there in the middle of the afternoon, and he was looking around in his mother's bedroom, and while there he heard his mother coming down the hallway. So he knew he'd been in trouble, and he runs and he hides in the closet in his mother's bedroom, and Mother comes in, and she isn't by herself. She's got her boyfriend with her. And Mother and boyfriend got to doing what mothers and boyfriends do in the afternoons in bedrooms, and they heard Father coming down the hallway. And Mother told her boyfriend, said, "My God, run and get in the closet, because if he catches this, he'll kill us both." So the boyfriend, he gets in the closet also. And after a while, the little boy said, "Sure is dark in here, isn't it?" And the boyfriend said, yeah, it is. And the little boy said, he said, I've got a baseball bat I've been wanting to sell, and he said, "I believe you ought to buy it." The boyfriend said, "Well, I guess so. How much you want for it?" And he said, "About $30. Boyfriend said, "Okay." After a while, the little boy said, "And I've got a catcher's mitt that goes with that." He said, "I think you ought to buy it too." Boyfriend said, "I guess so. How much?" And he said, "About $30. And boyfriend said, "Okay." After a while, the little boy said, "And I've got a ball that goes with them too, and I think you ought to buy it also." Boyfriend said, "Well, I guess okay. How much?" He said, "About $20. And boyfriend said, "Okay, fine." Now, the next day, the little boy's in the living room, and he's counting his money. And his mother came through, and she saw him, and she said, "Son, where'd you get all that money?" He said, "Mama, I can't tell you where I got this money." And she said, "You are going to tell me." She said, "Where in the world did you get that much money?" He said, "Mother, I can't tell you." And she said, "You are." And she jerks him up, and she takes him down to church, and she throws him in the confessional. And a little while, the priest comes in and sits down, and nobody says anything. And after a while, the priest said, "My child, what is it you have on your mind?" And the little boy said, "Sure is dark in here, isn't it?" And the priest said, "Are you going to start that shit again?" We always tell one spiritual joke, and that's it for the weekend. This afternoon, we looked at the problem in the doctor's opinion. We found out that the problem was, of course, a thing called a disease, that it was a twofold disease, a physical allergy of the body that ensures that every time we try to drink, we end up drunk and sick and in all kinds of trouble. Found out it was an obsession of the mind that ensures that every time we try to stay sober, left on our own resources, we always go back to drinking alcohol again. And we could see in the doctor's opinion where we have a hopeless condition of the mind and of the body. We could see where if we can't drink because of the allergy and we can't quit because of the obsession, then we have become absolutely powerless over alcohol. Then in Bill's story, we saw an example of a fellow who had that disease. We saw in Bill's story where his alcoholism progressed and became gradually worse and worse and worse. We could see where he had lost all control of his drinking. We could see where his life had become absolutely unmanageable. Hopefully, if we were alcoholics and studying and reading Bill's story, we could identify with him, and we could see that what took place in his life was taking place in ours. And then we could see in Bill's story where he found the answer to his problem through Eddie. And we could see in Bill's story where he applied the practical program of action in his life and he recovered from the disease of alcoholism. Then hopefully as alcoholics, through our identification with Bill and seeing we were much like him, then we also could begin to believe. We also could maybe start to hope that whatever happened to Bill could happen to us, and maybe we can recover also. Now, in this next chapter, they're going to show us exactly what happened to Bill. And we got to remember in Bill's story now, two things took place. First, Bill got with Eddie. And Eddie and Bill really began to form the first fellowship that we had. And then also in Bill's story, he had what he always referred to as a vital spiritual experience as the result of that little practical program of action. And in chapter 2, it's going to show us exactly what happened to Bill, and also many other people just like him. And we're going to find in chapter 2 that it's going to be divided into the two same things that Bill had to have. The first part of this chapter is going to deal with the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the second part of this chapter is going to deal with the vital spiritual experience that Bill had. And we're going to see that the solution consists of two things. First, fellowship, and then the vital spiritual experience. So let's look at chapter 2 and let's see what the solution was that Bill applied in his life. Joe?
Okay, page 70. There is a solution. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country, many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. And here he begins to describe the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. It has many different occupations, has many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. And Alcoholics Anonymous is it's a conglomeration of people. It's all different kinds. It's probably one of the most mixed groups of people in the world that ever come together. Usually people come together by their occupations or their political background or their economic background, their social background, or their religious background. But in Alcoholics Anonymous, we mix not by none of these. We are normally people that would not mix, and this is true of any great group of alcoholics we see in Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is what's so vast, it's so amazing about Alcoholics Anonymous, that we're normally people that would not mix. Just like this weekend, if we would take out the subject, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous from our midst, we come from so many different occupations, so many different races, so many different social backgrounds, so many different religious backgrounds, that if we didn't talk about alcoholism or Alcoholics Anonymous, we couldn't carry a decent conversation. We wouldn't have anything other to discuss with such different kinds of people. And we shouldn't not have ever mixed. But there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We're very close, although none of us should have never known the other. And he goes on to explain, and he switches to a parable. And here we always like to make note, and throughout the book, Bill had the great ability, like most great teachers, one many thousand years ago, who taught with parables. Parables are a shortcut to teaching. They're a way of painting pictures, using illustrations to show you points. And he does it so beautifully with words. He uses the illustration that we are like the passenger on the great line a moment after rescue from the shipwreck. And camaraderie and joy and Margaret convey the vessel from the stairs to the captain's table. And he draws a picture of this is a very timely way to travel to Europe. In the time this book was written, the way to travel to Europe was on the great ocean liners. On the great ocean liners, people were separated on these ocean liners by the same thing he mentioned up here in the top of the page. People were separated by their political background, their economic background. If you didn't have the right amount of money, you was in the steerage section. If you had a whole lot of money, you could be at the captain's table. If you had the wrong religion, you would be in the steerage section. If you had the right religion, you'd be at the captain's table. And if you had the wrong social background, you could still have money, but if you had the wrong social background, you couldn't be at the captain's table. Well, there was a long ways between the steerage section. This was the cheapest way to travel. And the minute as you came up from deck to deck, the money would get higher, and as you got on the uppermost decks, the finest way to travel was these people, the class of the vessel, that sat at this huge table with the captain. So the person from the steerage section should have never met the guy from the captain's table during this journey of voyage, and none of us have ever met in life. But in a moment of disaster, I think about the Titanic the night that it hit the iceberg. As these two people, when they hit the water, they had something in common. The guys in the steerage section, the guys in the captain's table. They had a common problem. They were in the water. And this is what brought these two people together. And I'm sure that guy from the captain's table never did ask that guy for a financial statement that night. You know, they were real busy, and he didn't ask him where he went to church or nothing like that. You know, they were trying to save their lives. And we're bound. This is the only thing that binds us here in this group this weekend. Although we come from so many different walks of life, we're bound together because we have a common problem of alcoholism. And he says, unlike the ship's passenger, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. And we're talking about a solution. We're talking about a solution. There is a solution. One of the solutions is the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. The Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is a support group. You know, it's very therapeutic for any person that comes into Alcoholics Anonymous to see a lot of people who have recovered from the same thing he's got. But he says, you know, our joy and escape does not subside as we go our individual ways. And I'm sure that once that person who, after they were rescued from the shipwreck, the person from the captain's table looked at the guy in the steerage section and said, I shouldn't be associating with this guy. And he went his way. And I'm sure probably the guy from the steerage section said, well, I don't need to be associated with this guy. He's a big shot. So they separated after they were rescued. But we will always be alcoholics. So our joy does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. This is just one element. The Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is made up of a group of people who have the same common problem. That is this one element that binds us here this weekend. The same. We all have the same common problem. But he goes on to say, but that in itself would have never held us as we are now joined. And that's really a warning. That this having suffered the disease of alcoholism, that in itself would have never held us together. That's just one element in this thing. You know, I think sometimes, you know, we don't really realize that, you know, the first 100 people, they didn't have 90 meetings in 90 days. They couldn't go to a meeting every night. They couldn't really rely on the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Today we have so many meetings, and the meetings are so prevalent, we can just go to meetings, and just live off of the power of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. But he says that is not enough. That it will not have held us as we now join. A tremendous fact for every one of us that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out in which we can absolutely agree, in which we can join as brothers, harmless action. This is the great news this book carries for those who suffer from alcoholism. And this is talking about the real solution. The other part of this solution is that we all, not only do we have the same common problem, what really binds us here this weekend is not the fact that we are all alcoholics. What really binds us here this weekend is we all have the same common solution. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous. That is a tremendous thing that binds us. So there are two things in this solution. And as we said in the first step, that we found that we were powerless. And if we're powerless, then the solution would be power. And this power is spelled out here as the power that lies within the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the power within the common solution, which is later going to be described as a vital spiritual experience. These are the two things, powers, that will overcome one's powerlessness of alcoholism.
I don't think we really realized the importance of this page and what they were saying until we did the first one of these in a formal setting, and this was back in 1977. Joe and I had been studying the book for several years prior to that, and finally we were asked to go do one of these in a formal setting for a group in Lawton, Oklahoma. And just prior to going to Lawton, Oklahoma to do that, I'd had a little trouble with my ticker, and we wasn't sure whether we were going to get to go or not, or how we would do it. And I remember Joe calling me from his home, and he said, Charlie, what do you think? We think we're going to be able to go this weekend. And I said, well, Joe, we almost have to go. You know, we've committed ourselves, and we need to go. Whatever else we do, we need to go to Lawton, Oklahoma. And he said, well, why don't I bring my car and I'll come by and pick you up. Let me do the driving and you can rest. And I said, fine, that's great. Now, Joe drives from his home in Little Rock, Arkansas up to my home in Maysville, Arkansas, which is about 225 miles away. And we get in his car at my place and we start driving toward Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now you can tell by looking at Joe and I that we're people that normally would not mix. You know, there is a little difference between us. After all, he's bald-headed and I'm not. You know? And there'd been a guy that had been sitting in on us from the very beginning, way back in 1973 even. His name was Tony. And Tony wanted to go with us to this thing in Lawton, Oklahoma. So we told Tony, you meet us at the Camelot Hotel parking lot in Tulsa, and then you can climb in and go on out to Lawton with us, and everything will be fine. And we got to Tulsa, and we picked old Tony up, and Tony got in the car. Now, Tony's a Mexican. His name is Vargas. And we started tooling it down the Turner Turnpike from Tulsa to Oklahoma City, and the black guy's doing the driving. The Mexican is riding shotgun, and the honky's laying in the back seat sound asleep. And we get out to Lawton, Oklahoma, and we're sitting there doing the big book study, and we reached this page of the book, and Joe just went through what he just finished going through, and I happened to look on the front row, and that whole front row was filled with Indians from the Anadarko Indian Reservation in western Oklahoma. That day I realized what this thing meant. You know, we are people that normally would not mix. But there exists among us a fellowship which is indescribably wonderful. Now, this feeling of having escaped from the common peril, the feeling of having escaped from the disease of alcoholism is one of the powerful elements in the cement which binds us together. And this has been true with all people who have suffered perils throughout the history of mankind. You know, anybody who has suffered a particular problem can most certainly help the one who's still suffering that problem by sharing their experience, strength, and hope with them. Alcoholics Anonymous, like so many other groups, becomes a support group where the older members can share and support the newer member until the newer member begins to get kind of straightened out. And my book says this is one of these powerful elements in the semen which binds us together. But then it gives me the first great warning. It said, but that in itself is not enough. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution upon which we can absolutely agree and join together. It says this is the great news that this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. And I think, again, one of the great tragedies in the world today is we've got literally hundreds of thousands of people coming to the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and participating in nothing else. Going to the meetings and going to the meetings and going to the meetings. And actually there's no changes taking place in most cases in their lives. It looks like in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous that the fellowship is a support group, but the actual changes necessary to recover are brought about through the common solution itself. You know, Dr. Silkworth told us that we would need to have a psychic change. And just going to the fellowship doesn't necessarily bring these changes about. Now, you can be a member of the Parent Teachers Association in school, but that does not necessarily make you a parent. You know, there is a process that you have to go through in order to become a parent. There are certain steps that you have to take. And the same thing with AA meetings. You can sit in them from now on, but that does not necessarily make you a recovered alcoholic. The changes will be brought about by this psychic change or the common solution here in the book. But on that page, they do describe the two parts to our solution. Here is the prescription, the power of the fellowship and the power of the common solution. Now, we're going to find the next few pages in this chapter are devoted to the people who make up the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's going to explain to a very great sense the kind of people we are. It's going to show us exactly why the fellowship alone is not enough. It's going to show us why we've got to have a power greater than human power in order to recover from our disease of alcoholism. If we would go over to page 20, it begins to talk about the alcoholic. At the bottom of the page, it talks about three types of people who drink alcohol. It talks first about the moderate drinker. It says they have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. Now, we call those people today the social drinker, the temperate drinker, the moderate drinker, whatever we wish to. Those are the people who react normally to alcohol. Those are the people that get that slightly tipsy, out of control, nauseous feeling, and after 1, 2, 3 drinks, that's really about all they want to drink, and alcohol's no problem for them. You know, if they can quit, or they can drink, or they can whatever they want to do with it. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. Now, he may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. Now, this guy's a hard drinker. He's not an alcoholic. And even though he drinks like an alcoholic, if a sufficient reason presents itself, he can either stop drinking or he can moderate his drinking so he won't end up getting drunk and sick and in trouble. And we see these people all the time. You know, these are the ones that said, back when I was in the service, I was an alcoholic, but I got out of the service and I got married and I just quit drinking, and I don't see any reason why you can't either. Now, we run into them all over the country. They are hard drinkers, they're not alcoholics. But what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker, and many of us did. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. Many of us did, many of us did not. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Now, here's the fellow who's been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and a Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He's always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day, and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tired at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor. But in that respect, he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. He's the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around, yet early next morning he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes a day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary, but this description should identify him roughly. And I think all of us, if we're alcoholic, we can find ourselves somewhere within that description. Well, the people who make up this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. The book says, why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it that he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? Perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why. Once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol whatever into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. Now, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. And for the first time now, we're beginning to really talk about the mental side of our disease. You know, the allergy cannot hurt me unless I take a drink. There's no way that I could trigger the allergy, produce the phenomenon of craving, and end up drunk and sick and in trouble if I don't take the first drink. And there's no way I can take the first drink unless my mind tells me it's okay to take it. Now, my body must have permission of the mind in order to function. And always, just before I take the first drink, I'm always stone cold sober. There's something in my mind that keeps telling me it's okay to drink, when it's obvious to everybody else that it is not, and when it's obvious to me from time to time that it's not, my mind still wants to tell me that it's okay. So therefore, my main problem seems to center in my mind rather than in my body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of the man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. You know, funny as it seems, sometimes we do tell the truth. I had a woman from Alliston the other day was talking to me about her husband, and he's still drinking, and she said, Charlie, he just lies and lies and lies. She said, how can you tell for sure when an alcoholic is lying? And I said, well, honey, you watch his lips closely, and if they're moving, he's probably lying. Once in a while he may tell the truth, and the truth, strange to say, is that usually he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses which are a satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. Now here comes in the word obsession. Remember, an obsession of the mind is an idea that overcomes all other ideas. And an obsession of the mind is so strong that it will make you believe a lie. And the obsession of the alcoholic is that somehow, someday, they're going to beat the game, and you and I know that isn't true. There's no way that they're ever going to be able to drink safely and have fun with it again. But they think they can, and they try, and they try, and they try, and they try, and their mind is always telling them that this time it is going to be different. Let's go over to page 24, squiggly writing. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. The almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, they are hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. You know, as a kid growing up, we lived in a relatively poor family and poor neighborhood, and we heated with wood. And I know in the wintertime for us to take a bath, we had to do that every Saturday night, whether we needed it or not. Mother would heat the hot water on the kitchen stove, and then she would put a big zinc wash tub behind the heating stove in the living room. And all the kids would take their bath in this zinc tub, and you start with the oldest one first and work your way down, and gradually by the time the little one's done, the water's getting pretty dirty, of course. But I remember one night I was in that bathtub taking a bath, and I remember I leaned over, and when I did, I stuck my rear end against that heating stove in the living room. And I remember it burned like hell, and it raised a blister on my rear end as big as my hand. And you know, I've never had an obsession of the mind to stick my ass on a hot stove since then. I can remember that so plain in my mind today. You know. But alcohol burned me over and over and over again just as bad. And my mind absolutely cannot remember with sufficient force the suffering and the humiliation of that last drunk. I am without defense against the first drink. For some reason, my mind simply will not remember that when it comes to alcohol. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, "It won't burn me this time, so here's how." Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. How often have some of us begun to drink in this nonchalant way, and after the third or fourth, pounded on the bar and said to ourselves, "For God's sake, how did I ever get started again?" Only to have that thought supplanted by, "Well, I'll stop with a sixth drink, or what's the use anyhow?" When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he's probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up may die or go permanently insane. Now, if we've placed ourselves in a position where we're beyond human aid, then the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous will not bring about recovery from alcoholism, because after all, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is made up of human beings. And in this first half of this chapter, through the description of the alcoholic, through the description of our mind, we can see where the fellowship alone will not solve our problem. Now, it's absolutely necessary that I have it. I doubt very seriously if I could recover without the fellowship, but the fellowship alone simply will not do the job, because I have placed myself in a position beyond human aid. On page 25 it says, "But for the grace of God there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations, so many want to stop but cannot." And then it says, "There is a solution." There is a solution to this hopeless condition of the mind and the body. There is a solution to this thing that's just been described in the first few pages of this chapter. Now let's look and see what that solution actually is. Joe?
Almost none of us like the self-searching level of our pride, confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for a successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we've been living it. When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We have found much of heaven and have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence which we had not even dreamed. The great fact is just this, and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experience. You know, it's right down to those two lines. This is the solution. Now, and this is what it brought about, which revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is an absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and our lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves.
And here you'll notice Bill has used the word revolutionized. He says he had revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. And the word revolutionize means to change. So we have changed our attitude toward life, toward everything else. And the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous will not bring about that change, but this solution will.
Okay, now right there on that, where it says spiritual experience, it has an asterisk. And then we follow that to the bottom of the page. It says fully explained in Appendix 2. And, you know, if we don't, again, we're talking about the first 100 giving us their ideas. And the ideas is what will change our lives. And as we said, the only way to transmit ideas from one mind to another is a word, whether it be written or printed. This is the only communication we have with each other. And they had to give us their ideas in words. And when they say spiritual experience, you know, we have to get the same idea that they are trying to communicate. And it was very difficult sometimes because some of the words we have a different understanding, a different conception of spiritual experience. And if we did, we would miss the idea of what they're trying to tell us. So it was necessary that they add this appendix, and appendix means something additionally has been added to the book since it was printed. So this was an addition added to the big book after the first printing to explain spiritual experience. Because in the first book, in the big red book, this appendix wasn't in there, and it left a lot of the readers hanging, trying to figure out, trying to use their interpretation of what a spiritual experience was. So, thank God that the appendix is in the back of the book to explain what is a spiritual experience, because if we didn't, the book would totally collapse unless we really understood what is a spiritual experience.
You know, before coming to AA, most of us had some idea of what a spiritual experience is, right or wrong. And based on our idea of what the spiritual experience is, in many cases, I doubt if we could have gone any further with the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. Because in that red book, there was no explanation at all about what they meant. And I know I had a preconceived idea of what a spiritual experience is. Now, I was raised in a good old Southern Baptist church. And you ain't been to a Baptist church till you've been in a Southern Baptist church. You know, I loved it then, I love it today. But in my Southern Baptist church, it seemed to me as though when I was growing up, I never did hear about a kind and a loving God. I'm sure they talked about Him, but the message never got to the pew I was sitting in. The only thing I ever heard about God in my church was hellfire and brimstone. That you go to hell for lying, cheating, stealing, drinking whiskey, and committing adultery. And I'd been doing that about 20-some-odd years, and I knew that God wasn't going to have anything to do with me. I knew He'd already told St. Peter, when that little four-eyed sucker gets up here, send him downstairs. We don't need his kind. Also within my church, I had seen what I thought was a vital spiritual experience. You know, in our Baptist church, we have what we call revival meetings. And normally you go to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday nights. But during revival week, you go to church every night of the week. And the purpose of revival week is to have people converting, to save the souls, and etc. And you don't ever trust your own preacher when you have revival week. You go out and you canvass the whole county you're living in, and you get the best preacher you can get, because you really want to do a good job of it. And I never will forget this one night we were having revival meeting, and they brought in this preacher from outside, and he was good. Halfway through that sermon, you could already smell the smoke and feel the heat. You could really tell what's going on in there. And always at the end of the sermon, we have what we call altar call. And if you wish to be saved, you come to the kneeling bench in front, and you kneel and you pray, and the preacher prays, and everybody else prays, and then you're saved, and you end up not going to hell. You know? And I never will forget this night. Here I'm 9, 10, 11 years old, something like that. And I had an aunt called Aunt Molly, and she's dead now, bless her heart, fine lady. She was a long, tall, slender lady. And I'll never forget that night after the sermon, she went to the kneeling bench to be saved. And she kneeled and she began to pray, and the preacher was standing there and he had his hand on her head and he was praying and everybody else in the congregation was praying. And all of a sudden Aunt Molly just fell over sideways in the floor. And she began to kick and she began to jerk, and then the next thing I knew she was speaking in a language that I had never heard before. Words coming from her mouth that I had no idea what she was talking about. And then all of a sudden she jumped up out of that floor and she began to run back and forth through that church house, jumping over the pew, skirt tail never touching the back of the pew. And I turned to my dad and I said, "Dad, what in the world's wrong with Aunt Molly?" And he said, "Son, I believe she's having a spiritual experience." Now, when I got to the big book on page 25 and I read I got to have one of them damn things, I said, there ain't no way I'm going to do that. Thank God for the appendix in the back of the book. Because left with my conception of a spiritual experience, I could never have gone any further than page 25. I'd have had to stop right here. Now, if we're going to have one of these things, why don't we go to the back of the book and let's see what a spiritual experience is. Appendix 2, page 569.
Okay, in this appendix, where he really, we'll see the real value of this appendix, how it really opens up and gives us all a working conception of the word. The terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book. Now, he's talking about two different terms as we look at it. And means just two different ways. Which upon careful reading, and I don't know a lot of drunks that do careful reading, show that the personality changes deficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. Now he's getting it right away down to something that is more understandable. He said that the spiritual experience, our spiritual awakening, will produce personality changes sufficient good enough to recover from alcoholism. Yet it is true that our first praying in the Big Red Book gave many readers the impression that these personality changes are religious experience. It must be the nature of a sudden, spectacular upheaval. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. We know that Bill's story. Bill had a sudden change. Though it is not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire immediate, overwhelming God consciousness, while they want by a vast change in feeling and outlook. A lot of the readers got the impression that they had to have the same thing that Bill had in order to recover. He says, among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. They occur in AA, but this is very rare. Most of our experiences are what a psychologist, William James, calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. Most of our recoveries will be of an educational variety. As we learn and apply, we will change over a period of time. Now, in this type of recovery, quite often friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he himself. As we go into this gradual change, other people in AA may notice us changing, but we don't see any difference. But he finally realizes he had undergone a profound alteration in his reactions to life, that such a change has hardly been brought about himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could have seldom been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource of strength, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. In some cases, people have sudden spiritual experience. In other cases, people work the program, and while they're working the steps over a period of months and learning, they change gradually. And after they change gradually, finally one day they realize that this power greater than themselves has worked in their lives, and they become aware of this. So, in one case, it's a spiritual experience. In the educational kind, where it grows slowly, it's a spiritual awareness or spiritual awakening. Both of them, Bill's talk with Dr. Thibault, both of them, he said, are just as effective. Whether it occurs suddenly or occurs slowly, in the education variety, which most of us are going to have. Most of us will not have a sudden spiritual experience. Most of us are going to have a spiritual awakening that takes place gradually over a period of months as we work the program. And he said both of them are just as effective. They both will produce a personality change sufficient to recover from alcoholism. And either one will occur as a result of the application of the 12 steps. This is the only thing our 12 steps says, that this is the only thing that the 12 steps produce. The working of the first 11 steps will only produce one result, a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening. This is the only thing, and they will always occur if we work the steps.
I found out 2 or 3 things real fast from this appendix. The first thing I found out is this is not what happened to Aunt Molly at all. They're talking about things here I can buy into. They're talking about terms and words which I can live with. They're talking about a spiritual experience as a personality change. A change in the way I look at life, a change in the way I think, a change in my emotional nature. My attitude and outlook upon life changes to something different. I can live with that kind of stuff, and I can kind of buy into that. It's telling me also that it doesn't make any difference whether it happens fast or slow. The result will be the same, a personality change sufficient to recover. Well, Joe and I have worked with many, many people over the last few years, and he says the same thing I do. I have seen a few spiritual experiences within AA. Sometimes you see this happen to a person and it would just be almost instantaneous. But also one thing we've noticed when that does occur, usually it's somebody that is extremely, extremely sick, that may not be able to have it in any other way at all. Most of us have what we call a spiritual awakening. That takes place slowly over a period of time. But the end result in both cases is identical, a personality change sufficient to recover. And it even tells me that I'll know when I've had one. It says, I will become aware of the fact that I have tapped an unsuspected inner resource of strength which I presently identify with a power greater than I am, where our more religious members call it God consciousness. And when I become aware of that fact, then I know that something has taken place in my life. And today I know that, I'm not the same person I used to be. My attitude and outlook upon life has changed entirely, completely, as the result of the practical program of action outlined in the Big Book. It tells me on page 570, most emphatically we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance, and that principle is contempt prior to investigation. And I'm afraid for a long time I held spirituality in contempt. I held a spiritual experience in contempt based upon what I had seen take place when I was a child. Thank God for the appendix in the back of the book. They have given me a new idea on what a spiritual experience really is. And it's nothing more than a personality change sufficient to recover from the disease. That I can live with. If you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle of the road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could.
Step one.
And the other, to accept spiritual help.
Step two.
Today we say over and over, we hear people say, oh, don't talk too much about God or you'll run the newcomer off. And the Big Book doesn't seem to mind that at all. It talks about spirituality quite heavily. And it finally gets around to giving us the one of two alternatives. One is to drink the way we are until we die, the other to accept spiritual help. My old sponsor finally straightened me out on that one day. He said, Charlie, you don't need to worry about running them off talking about God. He said, if you do, whiskey will put them right back in here every time. He said, tell them what they need to hear. And that's exactly what the book does for us. It shows us that we only got those one of two choices. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. Now, the book never tells me anything, but what it does not give me an example of it. It's just told me that I'm going to need a vital spiritual experience in order to recover from my disease. Now it's going to give me an example of a person who had this vital spiritual experience and recovered from his disease. Joe?
Again, as Charlie said, Bill had a great way of speaking he knew how to speak to the alcoholic and to us, because it seemed he was great gifted or directed to do this. He didn't bore you, but he would tell you, he would use parables, and he would tell you one way and then tell you the same thing over again, a different way, but making the same point. And he would use stories to reinforce, examples to reinforce the point that he just gave you. Charlie, I usually say, Bill used to tell, in this book, he usually tells the alcoholic what I'm going to tell you. Then he tells you what he wants to tell you, and then he tells you what he told you, and by that time you understand it. But he just said the solution was the vital spiritual experience. And now he's going to tell us the story on these next 2 pages of Rollin H. And this is where Rollin H got this solution from Dr. Carl Jung. A certain businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. For years he had floundered from one serum to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrist. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of the celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Jung, who prescribed for him. Though his experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. Now, as John said today, Rollin didn't go over there for a 28-day treatment program. He was over there for 1 year with Dr. Carl Jung. His physical and mental conditions were usually good. Above all, he believed that he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind, the hidden springs, that a relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling, he could give himself no satisfaction for his fault. So he returned to his doctor. John said today, this guy come from a good family, Ain't too many families that send a guy back to Europe for treatment every time he gets drunk. He must have been in pretty good shape. Whom he admired. And asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. In the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society. He would have to place himself in a lock and key, or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. That was the great physician's opinion. This man still lives and is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on earth where other free men may go without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. Some of alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where the state of mind exists to the extent that it does in you." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exceptions?" "Yes," replied the doctor. "There are exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are a phenomenon. It appear to be a nature of a huge emotional displacement and rearrangement. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and the complete set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them." Now we read here and we can see that he says this spiritual experience, alcoholics have been recovering with spiritual experience since the beginning of time. This was Dr. Carl Jung. And this guy was one of the greatest psychiatrists in the world. And he admitted to Rollin, "I can't help you." And he was a big man. He was on the tops in his field, so he didn't have to be ashamed in saying, "I can't help you." And we know a psychiatrist deals with the mind. And we're going to be, and he said, there are no skills to change your mind. I cannot deal with this with my skill. But then he went beyond his field of understanding. He said he went into the spirit. We know there are 3 dimensions to life: the physical being, the mind, and the spirit. Now, a psychiatrist don't deal with the spirit. This is not their field. There's some other people deal with that. But he said, "I haven't been able to help you through the mind. There's no way." But alcoholics have been recovering through spiritual experiences since the beginning of time. And where this had been taking place, not, before AA, every once in a while, alcoholics have always recovered, probably in a church, a religious setting. Not very often, but every once in a while an alcoholic went into a church or a religious setting, and through their program, he had a vital spiritual experience, changed his life. And this has been going on since the beginning of time. Now, the church didn't do this very often. And I imagine their attitude toward alcoholics, when they did it, they didn't want nobody else to do it because they didn't want a whole lot of that business. But alcoholics have been recovering in the church since the beginning of time. Dr. Carl Jung saw this. This is where he got it from. a psychiatrist that got this spiritual tool and gave it to Rollin. And Rollin came back to New York, and by the way, he went to a fundamental group of Christians and got in their program, and through working their program, brought about this spiritual experience in his life, and he recovered. And we can see how these things were put together. There was a psychiatrist. It finally became, Rollin, I believe, the only way you're going to recover through a spiritual experience. Later, this became step 2. I would believe the only solution is a power greater than ourselves. So really, the second step came from Dr. Carl Jung. And see, Bill had been to Dr. Silkworth and got the problem. And when Ebby came into his kitchen, he brought him the solution. And he also brought him the planned program of action. And we can look at these 3 pieces of the puzzle that make up our steps. We can look at the step 1, which came from Dr. Silkworth. And we can look at step 2 here that came from the psychiatrist, Dr. Jung. Now, these people didn't have no connections with each other at this time. Dr. Silkworth didn't even know Dr. Carl Jung. Dr. Silkworth knew the problem, and he said that the answer to the psychic change, but he did not know how to produce the psychic change. Dr. Carl Jung knew how to produce the psychic change. He had the solution, but he didn't know the problem. Now, neither one of these people knew how to bring about this. Neither one of them had a planned program of action. This was the people in the Oxford group. The people in the Oxford groups had a plan of recovery, and they didn't understand the problem or the solution. The miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous is these things from diverse places on one side of the world and the other by so different groups of people came together and were mated in Bill's mind. Bill's mind was a vessel for these things. And he was the first person to know all 3. Ebby knew 2. Bill knew 1. But when Ebby brought the 2, Bill was the first person to know all 3. What is the problem? What is the solution? And how do you find the solution? Bill, he said he was an instrument. And he wrote these things down for us to produce the recovery program, Alcoholics Anonymous.
And before we leave this solution, I'd like to look again at this description of the vital spiritual experience on page 27. Dr. Jung said, here and there once in a while alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me these occurrences are phenomenal. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Now this, Bill loves to use words. He's talked about the need already for the change. A while ago he described it as saying it's revolutionized our whole attitude and outlook upon life. And here he talks about emotional displacements and rearrangements. That means to change. In each case, they're using different words but describing identically the same thing, a change in our attitudes. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. This is what really takes place during the vital spiritual experience, is we change in our minds. In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the method which I employed are successful, but I've never been successful in an alcoholic of your description. Asterisk, bottom of the page, for amplification, see Appendix 2. They want to be sure that we read Appendix 2 to understand what they're talking about. The personality change, the change in ideas and attitudes and emotions and etc. The change is necessary to recover from the disease of alcoholism. And if we once can begin to see that, then we can begin to really see why just the fellowship alone is not enough. The fellowship supports that the changes are brought about by the vital spiritual experience. And you have in your handout sheet another little sheet kind of designed to show this. I think it's probably about the 3rd or 4th one down in your book. It is called, What is the Solution? And here on this page we've simply taken the solution and divided it into the 2 things we've been talking about. On the left-hand side of the sheet, we have the fellowship which supports us. And we can see where the new member is supported by the older members, by them sharing their experience, strength, and hope for the new member. And the new member comes in and stays sober, and over a period of time, a period of days, a period of weeks, the mind begins to straighten up a little bit. Alcohol gets further and further away. We begin to get to where we're able to look at things and see things and maybe read a little bit and understand it. And after we've been sober in AA for a while, it's almost impossible to not begin to believe. Because we hear person after person after person saying, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink for X number of days, months, or years by the grace of God, but because I have found a power greater than I am. And it's almost impossible not to begin to believe that there's some power, some force within this fellowship beginning to work that relieves us of our alcoholism. And when we begin to believe, then that opens the mind up a little bit, and the mind becomes willing to investigate a little bit. And upon investigation, we find that these people who have recovered, these older members, they have undergone a vital spiritual experience. We find out the vital spiritual experience is this simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And through the use of these steps, we revolutionize our whole attitude and outlook upon life. And we have a personality change sufficient to recover from the disease. Now, when that happens to us, then we become an older member. And the older member goes back on the left-hand side of the sheet, and he becomes one of those who supports the new member. And then that new member, in turn, believes, becomes willing, investigates, and has a vital spiritual experience, and becomes an older member, and goes back and supports the newer member. The newer member always drawing support from the older members, and the older members always gaining support through helping the newer member. And this becomes a chain that we go through. The one who has had the vital spiritual experience can help the one who is new to believe. And then upon his use of the steps, then he can recover also. I doubt very seriously if I could recover without both of these. Now, I doubt if I could have the vital spiritual experience, keep it, and hold it to me without enjoying the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I doubt if I could stay sober in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous without having the vital spiritual experience which changes me. You know, we stay sober in AA on fellowship only. And after a while, we begin to get bored with it. We see the same old people, the same old faces, the same old places. We keep hearing the same old thing over and over and over. And finally, we begin to get bored and we begin to withdraw from AA. And the next thing you know, we end up drunk all over again. You know, I speak from experience. You know, I tried it on fellowship only. They kept telling me, all you got to do is come to meetings and you'll be all right. They said if you'll go to meetings long enough, you'll soak it up by osmosis and everything will be fine. Now, that's a lie. That wasn't true in my life. I damn near died from the disease. It's only when I picked up the simple kit of spiritual tools that I began to recover from the disease of alcoholism. So here we see what the solution really is. Fellowship which supports, vital spiritual experience which changes it. And I can almost see in old Bill's head when he reached this stage of the book. Now, I'm sure he sat back and he said to himself, you know, that they still ain't going to like this vital spiritual experience. Even though I've shown them why they need it, and even though I've shown them that they placed themselves in a position beyond human power, that most of them are going to feel just exactly like I did. You know, they're going to feel that it's a sign of weakness. They're going to feel that maybe God wouldn't do it for them. They ought to be able to do it themselves. Some of them are going to think it's a sin and God wouldn't help us in the first place. And some of them feel that they can still do it on their own strength unaided, and they're not going to want to turn to spirituality in order to recover from this disease. And I think then he said to himself, I better tell them a little bit more about what's wrong with them. You know, he's always told us about the alcoholic in this chapter. But in the next chapter, more about alcoholism, he begins to show us what our problem really is. You know, we've already been told that the main problem centers in the mind rather than in the body. The main problem is the obsession of the mind that always leads us back to drinking. And in this next chapter, he's going to talk about the mind, period. Nothing about the body at all, strictly about the mind. In the next chapter he's going to talk about sanity and insanity. Now, step 2 says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And if I have to be restored to sanity, then that indicates that I must be insane. And some of us are highly offended when we're told we're insane. Then others of us say, well, I don't have any trouble with that insanity, because I remember all those crazy, stupid things I did while I was drinking. And I don't really think that's what the book is referring to. You know, all the crazy, stupid things that I did while I was drinking, that was not caused by insanity. That was caused by a mind that had been filled with a sedative drug that lowers the inhibitions. And if your mind has been filled with a sedative drug that lowers the inhibitions, look out, you're going to do some pretty crazy, stupid things. But that's not insanity. That's a mind that has been drugged by alcohol. The insanity I think we're going to find him referring to is the ability to see the truth. Now, sanity is defined as wholeness of mind. And if you have wholeness of mind, you can see the truth about any subject that you come up against. And if you can see the truth about a subject, then you can make the right decisions. And if you make the right decisions, you'll take the right actions. Insanity is defined as less than whole. And if you're less than whole, that means that in some areas of your life, you can't see the truth. And if you can't see the truth, then you make the wrong decision, which leads to actions which get us in trouble. So it's kind of like a pie. You know, we can take a pie, and until we remove part of that pie is absolutely whole. Now, when I take a piece of that pie away, most of the pie is still there. If I cut it into 10 pieces and I take one piece away, then 90% of it's still there. Just 10% is gone. If I take 2 pieces away, 80% is still there. Just 20% gone. If I take 4 pieces away, then 60% is still there. Just 40% gone. It's not considered to be all gone until you get below 50-50. Now, insanity does not mean you're all gone. It just means you're not quite all there. Craziness implies all gone. Insanity simply means we're not quite all there. And when it comes to alcohol, most of us have been strangely insane. And we're unable to see the truth. Maybe we can see the truth about everything else. But when it comes to alcohol, we cannot always see the truth. Let's see what he says about it in this chapter. More about alcoholism.
Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily or mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it to the gates of insanity or death. We learn that we must fully concede to our innermost selves that we are alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed.
And again, we see Bill doing this little peculiarity of his. You know, we noticed a while ago in that last chapter that for change, Bill used at least 3 different words. He used revolutionize, he used displacement, and he used rearrangements. And we'll find all the way through the book he had a tendency to do this. And people used to ask Bill, how come you keep changing the word? Why don't you just use that word and leave it as it is? And Joe and I have known 2 people that worked for Bill for years. And both of them tell us the same thing. They said people would ask Bill these questions and Bill would just kind of rear back a little and grin and said, when I took English courses in college, they taught me never to use the same words in consecutive sentences, never to use the same words over and over to describe the same thing. He said, that indicates your ignorance. And if you're a good writer and you're real intelligent, you never use the same word over and over. You always find different words to describe the same thing. And I got so interested in that not long ago, I went to the college close to my home and talked to the English professor and asked about this. And he said, why, yeah, we're still teaching the same thing today. You know, you never use the same words over and over and over. Now here he did it to us again. In the 2 chapters, or 2 paragraphs that Joe just read, he used 3 words which all mean the same thing. First he used the word obsession. And we've already looked at that. Now an obsession is an idea that is so strong, it overcomes all ideas. It is so strong it makes you believe a lie. Now from time to time we alcoholics know we cannot drink. We absolutely know that, and that's the truth about us and alcohol. But from time to time the obsession we can drink is so strong that it makes us believe we can drink. And hell, just a week ago we knew we could not. It made us believe a lie. He used the word illusion. Now we all know what an illusionist is. An illusionist is a magician. And a magician is so good that they can stand in front of you and with a few props and sleight of hands they can make you believe something that is not true. They can make you believe a lie. He used the word delusion. If we have deluded ourselves, that means we've made ourselves believe something that's not true. And here he used all 3 of these words within 2 paragraphs, all 3 meaning the same thing: to believe a lie, to believe something that's not true, to be unable to see the truth about something. And that's all insanity is. The inability to see the truth. Wholeness of mind, you can see the truth. But not whole mind, you would see something that's not true, you would actually believe a lie. Now this whole chapter will be devoted to examples of what he just said to us. It will be devoted to examples of the insanity of alcoholism. That thing that we will have to be restored from. Joe?
9:30. Okay, on page 32. Now we're going to do this again with a series of stories or parables or illustrations to make the point. The state of the mind preceding the first drink. This is the real problem. A man in 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning, and after these bouts he quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man. This was an exceptional man. He remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at age 55 after a successful and happy business career. Now, then he fell victim to the belief. He believed the lie. He believed the lie, which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink like other men. He believed that lie. Out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. In 2 months he was in the hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his force, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man of retirement, he went to pieces and was dead within 4 years. This man believed a lie. We could call it an obsession, we could call it an illusion or a delusion, but he believed something that was not true.
Here's what is true. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remain sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years found he was just where he left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we're in a short time as bad as ever. If we're planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. And the truth is that we will never be able to drink successfully again. And if we believe different than that, then we have a form of insanity. We believe something that's not true. Page 34, middle of the page. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he's already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. Many of us felt that we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it. The utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously this is the crux of the problem. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? But what is he thinking? The crux of the problem is the mental state preceding the relapse into drinking. And we must remember back and always, just prior to relapsing into drinking, the mind was free from alcohol. We were stone cold sober. And the mind, even though we are sober, would tell us it's okay to drink. So the crux of the problem is the state of the mind preceding the first drink. If I can see the truth about alcohol, I can't drink. I cannot drink knowing that it's going to make me drunk, going to get me sick, going to put me in a car wreck, and end up in a divorce court in a jailhouse. I can't drink knowing that. And that's the truth about me and my drinking. In order for me to drink, I've got to become insane. I've got to believe that this time it's going to be okay. That I'll be able to drink and not get drunk and not get in a car wreck and not get in jail and not get in a divorce court. And that's a lie for me. Because when I drink, everything goes to hell in a handbasket fast. Now we're going to look at a couple of examples. And we're going to look at the state of the mind preceding the first drink. Let's look at them real fast, and then we're going to take a break. Okay, Joe? Joe loves this next one. There's a fellow named Jim in here. And he's Joe. That's Joe's favorite part of the book. He normally gets screwed up when he talks about Jim. Let's see what he can do with him tonight.
He gets me started. See, he said that. Now, Jim is my main man. I love Jim. Our first example is a friend we saw called Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited the lucrative automobile agency. He has a commendable world record. He is a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. He didn't know drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated, he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. And back in those days, they put drunks in the asylum. Today, the treatment centers the same thing. They just changed the name of them, you know.
Same old deal. They just call them treatment centers today.
Okay. We told him what we knew of alcoholism, so they must have told him about the doctor's opinion, step one. And the answer we had found, the solution.
Step two.
Step two. So they gave him steps 1 and 2. He made a beginning. And really, at the end of step 3, it says step 3 is the beginning, so it looks like Jim took steps 1, 2, and 3. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman of the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge on his spiritual life. You know, the only way you can enlarge on step 3 is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but Jim quit at step 3, didn't do any more, looks like. To his consternation, he found himself drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. And this guy, half a dozen, that's 6. He got drunk 6 times real quick. On each occasions, we worked with him. Now, these were good AA members. You know, nowadays, if you got drunk 6 times, I doubt if you could even talk to him. But this guy, these were good. They came over and talked to him each time he got drunk. These were good people. He agreed he was a real alcoholic in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the treatment center if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family with whom he had deep affection. Yet he got drunk again. Now, this is 7 times. Boy, and, they were good AA members, but they're getting a little fed up now. They said, hey, Jim, wait a minute. They said, this is 7 times we've been over here. Now, how are you getting drunk, Jim? Said, we asked him to tell us. Now, exactly how did this one happen, Jim? And this is his story. This is Jim's story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. John and I was reading this many, many years before we found this out. I came to work on Tuesday morning. Where was Jim Monday? To me? Okay.
It really does say Tuesday morning.
It's bad about Monday.
Now, remember, sanity and insanity is the ability to see the truth. If you can see the truth, that's normal, sane thinking. You can make proper decisions. Let's see where he became insane. Let's see where he could not see the truth.
Okay, let's go. I remember I felt irritated. I had to be a salesman for the concern I once owned.
I think that's absolutely normal. If I had to be a salesman working for the concern I once owned, I expect I'd be a little irritated about that also. I think that's normal thinking.
I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious.
I expect that's normal. The boss is probably saying, where in the hell were you on Monday, Jim? Nothing real serious, just a few words with him. That's normal thinking.
Then I decided to drive in the country and see one of my prospects for a car.
This is absolutely normal for a car salesman. Always, you're on go. You're looking for somebody to sell a car to everywhere you go. We're going out in the country. We're going to try to find a prospect for a car. Normal thinking.
On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they had a bar.
This is normal thinking. There's nothing wrong with being hungry. And in that part of the country, in those days especially, I doubt if you could hardly find a roadside place that did not have a bar. You'd really have to look hard to find one of those. So this is normal thinking.
I had no intention of drinking.
No intention of drinking. Wasn't even thinking about a drink. Normal, sane thinking.
I just thought I would get a sandwich.
Normal thinking. There's nothing wrong with wanting a sandwich. There he goes.
This poor guy just wanted to sell a car, get a sandwich, and a glass of milk. He didn't go there to go to the nut house, I also had a notion by find for a customer for a car in this place, which was familiar. I've been going there for years, and I'd eaten there many times during the months I was sober.
Absolutely normal thinking. Just looking for a customer to car at this place. He'd eaten there many times, during the months he was sober. He didn't go there to get drunk.
I sat down at the table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk.
That's normal thinking. There's nothing wrong with ordering a sandwich and a glass of milk. That's same thinking.
Still no thought of drinking.
Still no thought of drinking. Same thinking.
I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk.
Normal, sane thinking. There's nothing wrong with 2 sandwiches and 2 glasses of milk. But now look at the squiggly right.
Watch it change. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind. If I ought to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it wouldn't hurt me on a full stomach.
Here's where he became absolutely insane. His thinking went completely screwy. He said to himself, I can take an ounce of whiskey, put it in that milk, and it won't make me drunk because I've got it on a full stomach. Now here's where his thinking changed. Now let's see what he decided to do based now upon the lie.
I ordered the whiskey and poured it into my milk. I vaguely sensed I would not be any too small. So I felt assured that I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach.
Now the decision led to the action. He ordered it, poured it in the milk, and he drank it. Now then, he has triggered the allergy. Let's see what happens now.
The experiment went so well, I ordered another whiskey and poured it into my milk. That didn't bother me, so I tried another. Now here was a man, that had just lost his business and been in the asylum from drinking, to decide to put an ounce of whiskey in a glass of milk. That is insanity. That is insanity. Thus started one more journey to the town of Jim. There was straight commitment, a loss of family position, say nothing of the intense mental and physical suffering which I always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. Yet all reasons for drinking were easily pushed aside as a foolish idea he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportional ability to think straight be called anything else? And right here we have a definition for insanity. Insanity is a lack of proportional ability to think straight. We want to get more specific as far as we alcoholics. We have the lack of proportional ability to think straight about alcohol. That's insanity. All other areas, but when it comes to alcohol, we have a lack of proportional ability to think straight about alcohol. And I can apply that to Charlie said to my life. Every time I remember in my life that I walked into a bar or to a liquor store, at the moment that I walked in there sober, I always believed I could drink. I walked in there believing I could drink. That's insanity. Today I've been restored to sanity. And I tell people for the last 24 years I haven't walked in the bar and say, hey mister, I drank some of that stuff 24 years ago like it damn near killed me. How much would you charge me for a bottle of it? That's insanity. To pay him for something that damn near killed me. I would have to believe a lie. I would have to say, this time it won't hurt me. I would have to believe the lie to take the drink.
I think we better take a break. Let's take about a 15-minute break.